Spectre Vision Radio.
On the surface, I wanted for nothing throughout my childhood. My father was an extremely wealthy man, a self-made man who'd started, grown, and sold a telecommunications company for a sum that he then used to make other shrewd investments, ones which meant we lived a life attainable to very few people on this earth. But if you peel back the layers of what that actually means for a child with no other parent than the one committed to building an empire, the picture becomes something else entirely. I was raised by a parade of ever-changing nannies who stuck around for varying lengths of time, sometimes long enough for me to feel the sting of their absence when they left, but more often than not, they were fleeting footnotes in my upbringing, dismissed for whatever fickle reason my father deemed a fireable offence, before I'd had time to properly bond with them. I was lonely, lacking real connection, lacking an understanding of myself and of other people. A psychologist would later tell me that I started acting out because I wanted to be noticed, that over time I'd resorted to bigger and more consequential stunts to get attention because I felt unseen. There's probably some truth to that. After all, there's no reason for a teenager who has everything to steal a car and torch it, or to deface a priceless sculpture garden with a golf club. My father's money meant I never really paid the price for any of it, which meant it became a pattern, as predictable as it was pointless. My life continued on that way for some time, a parade of misadventures my father's heft always got me out of. Until Melanie showed up. I'd seen disparaging things about her in gossip magazines, accusing her of being a serial gold digger, but that's not what I saw. With her in the picture, my father seemed different. He'd always been a non-stop machine who displayed very little emotion, but with Melanie around he seemed more available, happy even. I suddenly felt like there was a chance to actually know him, and it coincided with my need to act out, abating. It was a hopeful time, but it all changed when I came home one night, to find Melanie sobbing in the dining room. She told me my father had just received news from the doctor, the worst kind. He was terminally ill. He only had a few years left. In some way, I thought his diagnosis might bring us closer together, that we might make the most of whatever time we had. But he never said a word about it to me. Instead, he and Melanie became increasingly secretive. Their conversations were had in hushed tones, behind closed doors. And once again I felt that familiar itch, the one that told me I needed to make some kind of statement so he'd realize I wasn't invisible. And what I did, well, the less said about it the better. But the effect was not what I'd anticipated. On my 21st birthday, my father told me I was out on my own. He never wanted to see me again, and would never give me a single penny. He'd provided me with everything, single-handedly, as he put it, and all I'd done was throw it back in his face. My reaction was predictably immature. He wanted me gone, then I was gone. Who fucking needed him and his wealth anyway? But I burned through the money left in my account in no time at all. I wasn't savvy. I didn't know how to live cheaply. Besides, I was trying to bury my anger under mountains of drugs and drown it in floods of alcohol. Even though my head was a cloudy cocktail of resentment, I did realize something. Fewer and fewer people wanted me around now I wasn't able to foot the bill. I realized that any so-called friends I'd had only been around for the ride. They were nowhere to be seen now that I wasn't able to bankroll luxury-level partying or impromptu trips to Amsterdam or Ibiza. The guy they'd professed to care about for so many years was all maxed out, so their spare rooms were suddenly always full of visiting relatives. Their girlfriends suddenly had a problem with me crashing a couple of nights on the sofa. But the sadness I felt at being friendless was nothing compared to the hatred I felt for my father. I knew I'd been no saint, but it felt like he was punishing me far beyond retribution for whatever pain I'd caused him. All I wanted to do was scream at him, demand that he explain why he was putting me through all this. I went back to the house I'd called home my entire life on a couple of occasions during that period, when I was inebriated enough to think it was a good idea. I never got past Jimmy, the security guard. He'd been instructed not to let me in under any circumstances. My slurred, bitter words and revenge-seeking eyes would have been enough for him to turn me away regardless. But one day, life threw me a bone. My friend Barnaby tracked me down at the shithole hostel I was living in, paid for by the little money I'd convinced him to lend me after he told me his girlfriend didn't want me in the guest room anymore. Barnaby told me a friend of his named Charlotte was going away for work for 3 weeks and had asked him to feed her beloved cat Milo while she was away. He took a set of keys out of his pocket and pushed them forward towards me. "Just make sure you're out by the 28th, and leave it so clean that she'll never know you were there," he said. I quickly made myself at home. The cat Milo seemed to like me too, despite the fact that pretty much all I did was lay around and drink, stewing in my anger. I'd been there 2 weeks when Charlotte unexpectedly showed up. She didn't scream. She just calmly asked me who the hell I was and what I was doing in her flat. I told her the truth. Well, most of it. I told her I was a friend of Barnaby's, that I was down on my luck and he'd given me the keys as a kindness. "Just let me get my things," I said. Charlotte stared back at me, her expression hard to read. She looked past me to the kitchen counter where I was almost done making dinner. "I'd be okay with letting you eat your meal first," she said, delivering the words as if she was unsure herself of whether or not she was doing the right thing. "Especially if there's enough for 2. I haven't eaten since this morning," she added. I awkwardly thanked her, and a few minutes later we were sitting opposite one another at the kitchen table. We picked at my terrible food in silence, the kind that's painful enough for you to feel the need to break it. "Who is that?" I asked, motioning to a framed photograph hanging on the wall above the table, a black and white of a glamorous-looking woman staring straight into the lens, one hand on her hip, the other holding one of those long, old-fashioned cigarettes, an imposing granite church I didn't recognize looming behind her. Charlotte didn't appear to like the question much. "My grandmother," she eventually said curtly. I found myself feeling I should have just torn out of there the second she showed up, but luckily enough, how pathetically bad my attempt at dinner was sort of broke the ice. I found myself apologizing for how awful it was, and Charlotte couldn't help but smirk, and we soon found ourselves laughing along together. The tension dissipated and gave way to conversation. Against the odds, it started to feel natural, comfortable even. Later that evening, Charlotte admitted she knew who I was, that Barnaby had told her about me, about what had happened with my father. "Doesn't mean I expected to find you in my flat," she added. She said that she felt sorry for me, and I could tell it was genuine. It felt like a relief to know someone actually cared that I was being wronged, no matter how little. At the end of that first night, Charlotte said she couldn't in good conscience kick me out if I had nowhere to go, and offered to let me stay for a few more days. I was still there almost 6 months later, and Charlotte and I had become an item. She was the best thing that could have happened to me. She was loving in a way which showed me she wanted to take care of me. I suddenly had somewhere to live, someone to be there for me. She could see what a toll life had taken on me, and was even concerned for my health. She cooked for us, even prepared a smoothie kind of thing every morning for me, full of fruit and vitamins and some kind of powder she mixed in. And it wasn't just my physical health she cared for, it was my psychological health too. I wanted to go out and find a job, earn my keep, but Charlotte said I should take some time to recover, to figure out what it was I wanted to do with my life, who I wanted to be, before I rushed into anything. One day, I came back to the flat after Charlotte had sent me out with a list of groceries, to find that she wasn't there. I called her, but her phone was turned off, so I waited and waited. But she never showed up. The police hauled me in for an interview not long after I reported her missing. An aggressive-looking detective who moved like his primary source of energy was caffeine had me lay out just about everything that had happened since I'd met Charlotte, right up until she vanished. He looked at me curiously the whole time I was talking. "Why do you keep referring to Miss Gardella as Charlotte? Is that some kind of nickname?" he asked me when I was done. I stared back at him, not understanding the question. Her name is Justine Gardella, not Charlotte, he said. I didn't really have much time to process that, what it might mean, because bigger problems quickly presented themselves. I had no legal right to be in the apartment, and when the landlord finally decided their pity would extend only so far, and that Charlotte wasn't coming back to pay the overdue rent, I was once again faced with the prospect of having nowhere to go. On my final night, I went through the entire flat, desperately wanting to take anything with me that might help me find the woman I'd lost, a way to get back to the safety and security she'd brought into my life. Just when I was about to give up, I found myself staring at the framed picture of her grandmother above the kitchen table. I decided to take it with me, but when I took it down off the wall, it slipped out of my grasp and smashed on the floor. Being careful to dance around the broken shards of glass, I took the photo out of the frame, and I noticed there was something written on the back of it. Charlotte Gardella, 1968. The police made my life hell for a while after that. It was easy to see why I was prime suspect. I'd started a relationship with an older woman who paid for everything, allowed me to live in her flat despite me contributing nothing, and now she was nowhere to be seen. But what hurt more than that was the heartbreak. It was as if life had offered me an olive branch, only to set it alight when I'd gotten the hang of holding onto it. So I took to drinking. Things spiraled to the point that I woke on a park bench, hungover, damp with morning dew, feeling awful after a night of uneasy sleep snatched in 5-minute intervals. I sat up, cradling my pounding head, and said, literally out loud, how the fuck did it come to this? But that was just the beginning. My life was about to take a downward spiral at white-knuckle speed. A year later, and I was sleeping in the doorway of a closed-down restaurant. My sleep, whenever I could get it, had become plagued by a recurring dream. I'd be sitting in a one-room cabin in the dead of night, surrounded by a dense forest, that I could just about see through a dirty window. I'd hear something shuffling around out there. A bear, maybe? Whatever it was, I could tell it was getting closer. Every time, when that thing emerged from the forest to stare at me through that dirty window, it turned out to be my father. He'd just look at me, squinting and moving his head like he was trying to see me from different angles, assess me somehow. Not yet, he'd say. Not yet. I'd been going to a soup kitchen type place, one that handed out sandwiches and even hot food when they could. The demand was crazy. The food was utterly terrible, always tasted like ash for some reason. But I got used to it and told myself not to bite the hand that feeds. The last time I was ever there, I went around the back of the building afterwards to, well, help me forget what my life had become. I took cover behind a bin. The back door opened. A couple of guys who worked in the kitchen came out for a smoke break, and I found myself staring at one of them. I was convinced I recognized him. He bore an uncanny resemblance to someone who used to work for my father. Leon was his name. I'd never known exactly what he did, only that he'd come to the house from time to time to talk to my father in his study. I once asked my father what it was that Leon did, and he'd simply said, "He gets things done that I need doing." I didn't know if it was really him, or if not being clear-headed just meant I thought it was. Either way, it spooked me, and I got away from there as quick as my shambling, uneven steps would allow. One morning, in that closed-down restaurant doorway, I awoke to see a man approaching from across the street. He was carrying a coffee cup and a brown paper bag. He offered them to me. He said his name was Roland. He had a weathered face doing a pretty good job of hiding underneath a neat beard that was a perfect shade of white. He told me that he'd been like me once, but that he was now a new person. He said he'd since made it his mission to give other people opportunities to undergo the same transformation. We all live in a communal house, those of us who have changed, he said, but it's only for those who are ready. I nodded along, only half listening, concentrating more on devouring the food he'd put in my hands, of feeling the warmth of the coffee as it slid down my throat. But Roland just waited patiently until I made eye contact with him again. "You'll have to prove you're ready," he said. I looked past him, at the dark skies that were threatening rain, and weighed up the risk of following him against yet another night on the street. Risk doesn't really feel like risk when you have nothing to lose. Whatever it was he needed me to do to prove I was ready for change, I was willing to do it. Roland walked me to his car and drove me to a house in a sleepy-feeling residential area on the outskirts of town. The house looked like it had just been painted, the walls too clean and a shade of yellow too bright to be anything but a recently completed job. Upon entering, it was clear that the ground floor of the house had a different purpose than what you'd expect from the outside. There were no chairs, no sofa, no table. The wood floor was entirely bare except for something odd. A group of black rocks, arranged neatly to form the outline of a triangle in the dead center of the room. Roland didn't explain, and instead led me straight over to the stairs. We went down to the basement floor, which was crowded with bunk beds, enough to sleep 12 people. "That one's free," he said, pointing. Again, everything looked new. There were no scuff marks on the walls, on the bed frames. The bunks looked like flat-pack ones that had just been assembled, even smelled of that weird packaging smell. Maybe they'd only just moved there from somewhere else, I thought. I guess they were some kind of minimalist commune with some kind of new age spiritual type beliefs, but I was still struck by just how little material things were there. I'd got used to living with next to nothing, but even I had more in the beat-up bag I always carried with me than what I could see in that basement. But it was a warm bed, pillows, sheets. I was overjoyed. "There's a shower through there," Roland said, pointing to a door at the far end of the room. "Get cleaned up and meet me upstairs. The others will be here soon." When I ventured back upstairs, the wooden floor was littered with people sitting cross-legged. A sheet had been laid out, and it was covered in plates of food. I was handed a bowl and told to help myself. Roland explained that eating was done in silence, and I found it comforting to be able to just nourish myself and focus on nothing else. I was calm. I felt safe. We finished eating and I helped to clear everything away, wanting to show my worth. Once we were all sat cross-legged on the floor again, Roland stood up, and when he did, his eyes were fixed on me. He said that everyone who joined them, who lived in the communal house, had to first make a declaration of who they'd been, so they could expunge it and initiate the change of starting anew. He assured me that no matter what I said, there would be no judgment. There was nothing I could say that would cause them to form any opinion of me. All they wanted was for me to let go of the before, so what was next could be welcomed in. I hesitated for a long, long time, but no one rushed me. There was no sense of frustration or impatience in the room. Eventually, my mouth started working and I told them everything. Roland was right. There was no air of judgment, no questions, no awkward glances. Instead, they all clapped when I was finished, cheered even. I found myself smiling uncontrollably, invaded by the sense that even if it was in a strange way I never would have expected, everything might just turn out okay. The triangle of rocks still hadn't been explained to me, and I didn't ask about it. I figured there was still a lot for me to learn.
Not yet.
I was awoken in the middle of the night by a very real sense of panic. I'd only just opened my eyes when hands darted through the darkness to snatch me out of my bunk. I was too bewildered to properly fight back, as they dragged me upstairs. The main room was now lit by the jittery glow of countless red candles in ornate, intricately patterned bronze holders. I tried to thrash my way free, but there were too many of them. They carried me over to where the triangle of rocks was arranged on the floor and forced me to sit inside it, holding me still. Out of the chaos, Roland appeared. His demeanor was unnervingly gentle, as was his voice, and he told me that this was the next step in letting go of who I was, so I could welcome in what was to come. "We listened to your story," he said, "and what's clear is that there's still part of you clinging to your father. Part of you who wants to carry your father around inside you. Isn't that right?" I stared back at him, stupefied and silent. "You must answer my question," he said. "It's the only way to guarantee the change." "Yes," I said, partly because I wanted whatever this was to be over with already. Roland nodded in approval, and I was handed some kind of ceramic cup. "Drink its contents," he ordered, "down in one." I did as instructed. Only when I'd consumed the last drop did the aftertaste hit me. It tasted like dirt or ash. I stared back at Roland, his eyes now gleaming excitedly in the dim, shimmering candlelight, and at the strange people I'd somehow found myself surrounded by, who were all staring at me with that same eager expectation. I waited for what was to come, whatever the next step in this ritual I didn't understand was. But instead, my vision blurred. My head started to spin. I felt my body going limp, realized I was losing consciousness, and everything went black.
Not yet.
The first thing to come back to me was sounds. Sounds I knew all too well. The sounds of the street. I opened my eyes and stared out at a familiar view. The view from the doorway to the closed-down restaurant I often slept in. My head span and I felt a wave of nausea hit me so hard that I quickly shot up onto my hands and knees and vomited. When I'd purged myself and there was nothing left, I collapsed back against the door. My head slowed enough for me to see that my sleeping bag and rucksack was still with me. The memories of what I thought had been the last 24 hours came flooding back. Only now, I was unsure if they were memories at all. Had I taken something and hallucinated the whole thing? Or was it just the disturbed dreams of a broken mind? Perhaps I really was starting to crack. Terrified and alone, I felt a strong pull to go home to my father, to reconcile. If he could see what I'd become, there'd be no way he could in good conscience pass away and leave me behind like this. If he was still alive, surely it had to be possible. But I feared I was too late, and that the illness might have already taken him. But I had to try. A grueling week was how long it took me to get back. It was around midnight when I stumbled up to the front of the house, its proud facade dotted by windows emitting a warm glow so inviting it felt intoxicating. I'd come this far. I had to get inside. I didn't expect the security guard, Jimmy, to recognize me, so I told him who I was and why I'd come back. To my surprise, he nodded reassuringly and opened the gate and told me to go straight up to the house. As I walked up to the front door, treading a path I'd taken so many times before, I was invaded by a strange, quiet sense of relief, like somehow I'd be staying there. I walked through to the dining room where I found Melanie sat there alone, a half-drunk glass of wine in front of her, the rest of the bottle next to it. She smiled at me, and it struck me as utterly insane that she would do so. I'd been to hell and back since she'd last seen me. I was gauntly thin, missing teeth, scarred, a hunched shadow of my former self. And she smiled. She offered me a drink, and I took the opportunity to grab the bottle from the table, guzzled the red liquid down until there was none left, just to see if it would wipe that stupid smile off her face. It worked, and her expression shifted to something like pity. "We've been trying to find you," she said. She told me that since my father had banished me from their life, he'd spent every waking hour trying to find a cure for his illness. He travelled the world, spared no expense, done the tried and tested, and the radical and risky, and nothing had paid off. "There isn't a stone on this earth that we've left unturned," she added. I asked her where my father was. "You can go see him in his room," she said. So he was alive. I stared back at Melanie a moment, and was struck by something truly genuine in her expression. She really did want to reunite me with my father. I could see it, feel it. I turned and made my way to the staircase. My battered body groaned as I climbed it, but I was spurred on by a strange sense that if I could just let my father in, show him what I'd become, this might somehow all be over. I approached the door to his bedroom and knocked, but there was no answer. Gently, I pushed it open. It was dark inside, and my eyes took a moment to adjust. The curtains were partially open, and there was enough bluish moonlight for me to just about make out the lumpy silhouette of my father under the covers of the bed. I stood there, unsure whether or not to wake him. But then I heard something. His words came weak, faint, like his lips were right to my ear, whispering to me.
Not yet.
It shifted something in me, and my perspective of what I was really looking at. I marched over to the bed, whipped off the covers, and saw what was really lying there. It looked like it must have once been my father's body, but it was mummified, petrified somehow, turned hard and grey by some process I didn't understand. But what I did understand was that that body had been dead for some time, and it was missing its head. I ran out of the room screaming, but was intercepted at the top of the stairs. A small crowd had gathered since I'd been inside my father's room. Fear drenched every inch of my body as I registered their faces. Roland and his cronies. They overpowered me, grabbed my limbs and carried me back downstairs. I kicked and screamed harder than I ever had in my life, but I couldn't break free. They slammed me down onto the dining room table and held me in place. One of them held my nose shut while Roland pushed a cup towards my lips. I tried my best to resist, but they forced it down my throat, that liquid that tasted like ash. They just held me until my throat gave out, and I was able to scream no more. I stared up at them, their eyes wild with excitement. Roland, his cronies, Melanie, and I realized there was someone else there I recognized too. Charlotte. I pleaded with her to help me, to stop whatever this was, but she just shook her head, her eyes full of that same feverish anticipation as the others. With my voice shot, it suddenly got very, very quiet. The air in the room changed, became colder. I began to shiver. I didn't see him, but I knew that my father had entered the room. I felt his presence coming closer, until he was with me.
Now.
I heard him say.
Now.
And when he spoke those words, he used my lips to do so.